Welcome to Media Rants. This is part two of my interview with Mike McCabe, the former executive director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, the author of the fiction novel Miracles Along County Q, author of two other books, Blue Jeans in High Places and Unscrewing America, also author of the great Substack that I would urge everyone to look at called Abion House,
E
Abiyyan. Oh
Ebiyyan.
yeah, I'm sorry, it's the A sound. Ebiyyan, Abion House, and it's a
Yeah.
really great Substack. And in this part of the interview, we're going to talk about Wisconsin politics. Um, Governor Tony Evers, Wisconsin's governor, is coming to the end of his second term, and he recently announced that he's not going to be running for a third term. Mike, in 2018, you and other candidates ran in the Democratic Party primary that Tony Evers eventually won, and then he became governor. What were your concerns about Tony Evers in 2018? And in his two terms, has he exceeded your expectations?
I don't know if I had any concerns about Tony. I mean, he is what he is. He had been elected to statewide office. He was state school superintendent. He always struck me as more a manager than a leader. He'd been a school principal, school superintendent, whatever. He'd always been kind of in that position of managing things, right? And so there's always that question of whether he had it in him to be a dynamic leader. He also, started out his campaign with very moderate stances, and I think one of the benefits of such a robust primary is he could sense the reaction that candidates were getting when they took more ambitious or aspirational stands on issues or brought up topics that, or he was steering clear of, and he had the good sense to embolden his positions and change his stances on a number of issues, which I think helped get him elected. I was more concerned not with I was not so much concerned about Tony Evers and his presence in the race as I was concerned about the Democratic Party. Um, Three times the party had tried to more or less anoint a candidate, clear a path to the nomination for a candidate of the party establishment's choosing, and three times they lost to Scott Walker. And I really felt that Walker had to go, and so I felt really strongly that there just needed to be a robust primary, and the party establishment is allergic to primaries. They
Yeah.
detest them, and they want to avoid them at all costs. And there's 1,000 ways that party insiders can sabotage a campaign or can put their thumb on the scale and help a candidate. But the one thing they can't do is keep you off the ballot. If Wisconsin's election laws have ballot access rules that make it really easy to get on the ballot. And so I figured if I can get on the ballot, and they can't stop me from doing that, and then if my campaign has enough appeal and starts to draw enough of a following, I can have an impact on this race. The party insiders can still prevent me from becoming the nominee, just as national party insiders prevented Bernie Sanders when he seemed to have a head of steam uh, behind him, and he looked like he had a path to the nomination, and they took steps to make sure that he didn't get it, both in
Yep.
2016 and then again in 2020.
They
Uh,
sure did.
and I knew that they could do that, but they couldn't prevent me from being in the field. And even though they spent months trying to get me to drop out, they couldn't make me drop out. And so I just told them I'm going to be in there until the end. And I think that actually helped Tony Evers. I think the presence of people like me in the race, the kinds of issues I was raising, the kind of positions that I was willing to take, made him then adjust to that. And he took bolder positions and changed his stances on issues. The other thing that it helped him with is we for 11 months, 12 months, you had candidates going around the state traveling to one town after another, and in the local newspaper would show up, or the local radio station would show up, the local TV station would show up. They would interview you, and all these candidates were saying Scott Walker's got to go.
Yeah.
And instead of waiting until just a few months before the election to have the nominees start talking, there was a Democratic voice out there for a long time, and it made Tony Evers a better candidate. He had to stand with us in forums and in debates,
Yeah.
and he was not strong in those early debates, but they weren't televised.
No.
And
Right.
by the time he was up against Walker, he could hold his own. So I think that primary, it not only didn't do him any harm, he ended up getting elected. I think it actually did him a lot of good. And I think
Well,
it's part of the reason why he did get elected.
I agree. Well, full disclosure, I supported you in 2018 in the primary, and I thought that you and Kathleen Vinehout, who was the former senator from the Eau Claire area, the two of you, more than any other candidates, were running on the need to break down this urban-rural divide, right? And I especially like the way you got at that because your orientation, which I believe is what I believe also, is that we shouldn't be thinking of left right. We should be thinking of top down. And when we think of politics as top down, I believe the urban rural split disappears,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you've said it many times.
Mm-hmm.
The senior farmer up in Clark County has a lot more in common with a single mom in Milwaukee than the left-right continuum allows us to see. Can you talk more about that, the top-down versus the left-right?
Yeah, we've been conditioned to think about politics horizontally. Who's on the left, who's on the right, who's in the middle. And when you think that way, yeah, that black woman in Milwaukee who's maybe working at a daycare center or is a nursing assistant or something like that, she's seen as being on the left. And then there's a family dairy farmer up in Clark County
Yeah.
who's filing bankruptcy and is struggling mightily. Um, he's seen as being on the right, and so they're seen as being polar opposites. But if you think vertically instead of horizontally, and if you think about who's on top and who's on the bottom, and I don't just mean financially or economically, but
Right.
not only who's richest and who's poorest, but who's got the most influence, who's got the loudest voice, whose voice is muffled. Those two people are in exactly the same spot on the spectrum. If you think about it with a vertical spectrum, if you think about who's on top and who's on the bottom, they're right there together. And if we were conditioned to think vertically instead of horizontally, those two people would be political allies. They wouldn't be political enemies. And of course, we think horizontally by design. It's because very powerful and privileged people want those two people to see each other as enemies. They want them to, they don't want them to be allies, because if they're allies, that puts, the privileged folks' power at risk.
It sure does. And so when Tony Evers got elected, there were many people, myself included, who thought that since he was not perceived as a pure Dane County, Madison type of Democrat, that maybe there would be more progress made in, say, unifying the state. Do you think that Tony Evers made much progress in that area? Because I get the sense that our urban-rural divide is wider now than it's ever been. I don't think it's his fault. But do you
Yeah.
think that anything has been done in the last 8 years?
Oh, I think the rural-urban divide is wider and it's widening. I don't think it's done widening. It seems to be getting worse rather than remaining stable or getting better. And I don't think it's Tony Evers' fault. I don't think, I think we're being swept along in a very powerful current that is a national political current. Wisconsin used to have a very unique identity. We used to be a state that blazed trails. We used to, we created the first kindergarten, the
Yeah.
first system of unemployment compensation, the first workers' compensation system.
Yeah.
We were a state of firsts. We were innovating as a state, and a lot of states would follow Wisconsin's lead, but Wisconsin would blaze the trail first. the first gay rights law was enacted here in Wisconsin. It just
Right.
one thing after another. Wisconsin was out in front. Now I get the feeling like Wisconsin has sort of lost its imagination, and we're no longer thinking about blazing new policy trails. We're now just sort of swept along in this rushing current nationally that is kind of taking us backward, and that's very sad to see. And I don't think that Tony Evers had any hope of being able to reverse the direction of the current, because it is a national phenomenon. Um, so I don't blame him for that, but I am saddened by how there is an absence of effort on the part of progressives to be more imaginative and to seek to blaze trails. I don't expect this current legislature to go along with an ambitious policy agenda. They're too busy trying to wreck things. But that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be voices out there that are putting out the call to the people of Wisconsin to think outside the box and to be more imaginative, because and to sort of harken back to that tradition that Wisconsin had for so many generations of being a trailblazer.
Yeah, and this was one of my frustrations with Governor Evers, who was a genuinely decent guy and very much needed following Scott Walker, right? I mean, I thought Scott Walker engaged in divisive tactics that I think it's going to take generations for the state to come back from. Right. So I think Evers' more grandfatherly approach, if you will, was needed at the time. But what did frustrate me was that the thing he seemed to get most passionate about was fixing the damn roads. All right. That's
Say that a
great.
few times.
Yeah. I mean, that's great, right? I mean, we should have good roads in Wisconsin. But I mean, shouldn't a Democratic Party, especially the leadership of the Democratic Party, be standing for big things? Whenever I meet candidates, Democrats that want to run for Senate or governor, I always ask the question, so what would be your 30-day agenda? And I'm so, first 30 days in, what would you do? And I'm always disappointed in the answer, because either it does seem to be something along the lines of fix the damn roads, or it's reacting to something the Republicans are doing.
Right.
Right? We'll
Well,
reverse what they did. We'll fight them. We'll veto their stuff. Go ahead, Mike.
there's this line that I've used many times to describe the two parties, and I know it annoys a lot of Democrats when I say it, but I've said it many times, and I don't actually identify which party's which. But I said we've got one party that's scary and another that's scared, and I don't even have to say which one is which, and people instinctively know what I'm talking about. I've never had to say which party is which when I say one is scary and the other is scared. But I'm very troubled by the absence of ambition,
Yeah.
the timidness that we see in our politics. We've got one side that has got the wrecking ball out and just wants to demolish things, but the other side is not speaking aspirationally about where we need to go and what we need to do next. And if old institutions and old policies do get demolished, uh, do we just go? Do we just accept that we're going back to the 1920s or the 1890s, or do we say, okay, here's what we want to build. Here's the new architecture that we want to erect. And to me, if you think about what young families are struggling with, what working people are struggling with, it's stuff like housing affordability. It's access to health care, so you can afford to get medical attention if you fall ill. It's daycare. It's how do you raise a family with the cost of daycare, and it's access to true living wages. There's such incredibly grotesque economic inequality in our society right now. You've got billionaires who are rigging the system in their favor so that they can become trillionaires. and an awful lot of people are being left without the ability to, to have any hope of accessing the American dream. And so to me, if a Democrat's not talking about new and innovative ways to get at the housing crisis and make childcare affordable and make healthcare a human right that is available to everybody, so that that you don't have to go bankrupt just because somebody in your family falls ill. If they're not talking really ambitiously about those kinds of things, then they're not doing us much good.
Yeah,
And
I agree. I agree. I was listening to an interview the other day with you remember Robert Reich,
I do.
Clinton's labor secretary, and he was making the point that we make this distinction now between progressive Democrats and establishment Democrats. And he said, why isn't every Democrat progressive? I mean, is this so-called establishment Democrat? You spent many years tracking money in politics. Is even the idea of an establishment Democratic Party, is that a symptom of the money in politics?
Oh, it is. I think part of the reason why you've got a scared party is because they're afraid of the money. The money people, the billionaire class wants a system rigged in their favor. They want things that will further enrich them, and they don't want people talking about health care for all. In the governor's race, all the candidates were saying, yes, we should take the federal Medicaid money, which we didn't. Wisconsin
Right.
turned it down. We should take the federal money to expand Medicaid access. And I said, no, we should make our Medicaid program, known as Badger Care in Wisconsin, we should make it available to everybody. We should allow everybody to buy into Badger Care. And then slowly but surely, a number of candidates, and eventually even Tony Evers said, Badger Care for All is a pretty good idea. Now, he hasn't been able to bring it about. I don't know if he even believes in it, but he was
Right.
willing to at least say that. And I think it created a distinction between him and Walker that was enough to get him elected and send Walker into retirement. But yeah, the money people don't, the insurance industry doesn't want a national health care program, or they don't want Badger Care for All here in Wisconsin. And that's where it takes courage to stand up to those money interests, and and Democrats haven't been willing to do that.
What's your take, Mike, on this most recent budget that the Wisconsin legislature passed and the governor signed? Many in the Democratic Party were disappointed with Governor Evers. They thought he should be tougher in negotiation, that he should hold out for more money for childcare, especially for K through 12 and many other areas also. Do you think that Tony Evers, throughout his two terms, gave in too easily on the budget?
Oh, it's easy to, from an outsider perspective, to say I would have done this or I would have done
Right.
that, and you don't know if you could have really accomplished it unless you were actually in the position. Um, but I get it. There was some federal money that I think both sides wanted to access before the Trump administration clawed it back and took it away from states. And Medicaid was one area where they could get some federal money and take advantage of it before new rules were put in place by
Right.
the current regime that took it away from states. And I get a lot of the pressures that the governor was under, and I also get that he was dealing with a very hostile legislature that simply doesn't want to work with him. So there's that partisan divide. But I think the answer to all of that is to be willing to be a voice for dramatic change,
Yeah.
and to use the bully pulpit of the governor's office to at least articulate a vision of where Wisconsin should go. Even if you're not able to get the majority of legislators to go along for that ride, you still have to say, this is where we should head as a state. And I think that's been the governor's biggest shortcoming, is he doesn't have the ability to use that bully pulpit to its full effect. He's not able to articulate a vision of what Wisconsin should become, even though he would be fought at every turn, and they would resist his vision in the legislature because it's a very backward thinking legislature right now.
Yeah.
you still have to be forward thinking, and you have to describe where you're going before you'll ever be able to get there.
Yeah, I mean, Wisconsin was known as the laboratory of democracy. Our state motto is forward. I mean, you've got history on your side if you take a forward-thinking platform, and you've got the people on your side.
Yep. And it is
Right.
it is it is striking when you contrast what happens in Wisconsin to what happens on the national level. Trump just he takes liberties with executive power, and he just carves out new executive powers. If he doesn't get his way, he just makes up a way. And that fighting spirit is, I think, leading our country. He's taking us in a destructive direction. He's making us go backward. But the part that I like about that fighting spirit is it could be used to take us in a forward direction. It could be used in an ambitious and progressive way. But we have a very cowardly or timid form of progressivism in our state, in our country, and we have a very aggressive sort of backward thinking. Yeah, I don't even want to call it conservatism.
No, I wouldn't know.
It's a reactionary kind of politics.
Right.
And Trump speaks fondly of the 1920s, says that's a glory era, in the 1890s. Both in the 1890s and the end of the 1920s, we fell into economic depression in this country, and working people were crushed. And people in Trump's class did just fine, but
Did great.
working people were crushed. And he wants to take us back to that. Well, no, we've got to talk about not where, we don't have to pick some past period that we think is a
You know,
glory period. We need to imagine a new glorious era in the 2030s or 2040s.
and this is where I get really upset with the establishment media because when you've got a president that's calling for a return to the robber baron era, right?
Yeah.
Working people squashed, massive wealth, tremendous inequality, no civil rights, put down of labor movements, and so on. When you've got a president actively calling for that, and the mass media just won't expose that. I mean, to what extent do you think the mass media in this country are enabling some of the worst of, say, the Trump administration?
Well, I was trained as a journalist,
Right.
and I've worked as a journalist, and I understand the business. I have some sympathy for reporters because whenever there's bad news for Trump, that's exactly when he says something or does something really outrageous because he knows that he can change the subject. And I sympathize with reporters because if the president of the United States does or says something outrageous, they feel a duty to report it, but they're being played. Trump is using them for his own purposes, and so. But I get their dilemma. They feel an obligation to report an outrageous action or statement by the president of the United States, but I think it probably also dawns on them that he's doing it. He's using them to deflect from other bad news. But having said that, having expressed some sympathy, I think the what saddens me so much is how so much of the mass media have cowered at his
Oh,
feet and have gone down on bended knee and have been willing to pull punches because they fear his retribution. And if there's ever been a moment where that industry needs to stand together and fight like hell, it's this moment right now. This is as big a crisis for the media as I've seen in my lifetime, and it's a moment when they have to say, all right, this is fighting time, and we're gonna get more aggressive. And when he talks about the 1920s or the 1890s, we got to tell people what happened in the 1920s and the 1890s. We've got a
right.
duty to alert the American people to where he wants to take us.
I agree with you 100%. If we go back to Governor Tony Evers, Do you think he made a wise decision in not running for a third term?
Oh, I don't know. They all look at poll numbers and they're they're all making their calculations about their hopes for election or reelection. And to me, and I can't look into Tony Evers' head or his heart. I don't know what motivated the decision. But to me, if you really believed that Wisconsin, if you had an idea of what Wisconsin's future should look like, and you felt like you had the ability to take us there, then a third term would make sense. But he hasn't he hasn't used the bully pulpit of the governor's office to articulate such a vision. He's been kind of a caretaker governor. He's been able to ward off the demolition crews to a certain extent, and there's value in that. He's been able to stand up to destructive Republican actions to a certain
Mhm.
extent. What he hasn't done is mapped out a future direction for Wisconsin. He hasn't given us an ambitious vision. And so, I I think he served a certain purpose. I think he was a calming influence. I think
Yeah.
is sort of what you were describing. I think he was kind of a calming influence at a time where the previous governor had done so much to just rip the state apart and put people at each other's throats. And there's value in that. But I think that it's time for an infusion of new blood, and whether the Democratic Party is willing or able to bring about that kind of an infusion is another question.
Well, so I'm assuming there's going to be a robust primary now. I think there are already two or three people have
Yeah,
announced that they're running. I think Milwaukee County Executive David Crowley, I believe, is going to be in the
yeah.
race. Um, Sarah Rodriguez, the lieutenant governor, is going to be in the race. And I don't know if any others have officially announced, but what do you think we should be looking for in a Democratic Party nominee for governor?
I think that you got to have somebody who is willing and able to spell out for people in plain terms what kind of state Wisconsin has the ability to become. But then we need somebody who will talk bluntly about things like housing and healthcare and daycare and livable wages and and those are the things that have got young families at wits end. They're
Well, let me
thinking,
ask you,
how
my
the
my
heck do we afford to make this work?
right. Well, we've said you're originally from Clark County, and rural counties like that in Wisconsin have become deep red.
Mhm.
Should Democrats just give up on those counties?
No.
No, I didn't think you'd say no. So, what do you think Democrats in 2025 need to be doing to at least make the Clark counties of Wisconsin less red?
Well, Democrats have largely given up on rural Wisconsin and rural America. I think they just feel like, hey, we don't have any chances of winning elections there. The mistake in that thinking is that if you don't, even when you're losing elections, you've got to be listening to them, you've got to be learning from them, and then you've got to be talking to them, and you've got to be saying that we can make your life better in these ways. And you know I grew up at a time when our member of Congress, the House of Representatives, was a Democrat, and I was living in what is now one of the deepest red counties in America. And the member of the House of Representatives was a Democrat. The state senator was a Democrat. The state assembly representative was a Democrat. And I remember when Democrats were not only competing but competing successfully in what's now Trump country. And the only way that they're going to get back to getting Democrats elected there is if they compete there. They
Yes.
go and listen to people, and they learn from people what they're struggling with, and then they respond to it. But if they just take an urban agenda out to rural America and say, here's what we stand for, rural folks are going to say, what's in that for us? You don't understand us, and you're not talking about any of the problems that we're facing. And so yeah, it I don't expect Democrats to turn this ship around in rural America anytime real soon. But the way you start is by going out there and showing that you care. And that's what I've seen an absence of. And it was one of the reasons why I ran for governor in
Right.
2018. And when you look at primary election results, most of the Democratic vote comes out of Milwaukee and Madison. So I get it. If I had listened to the consultants, I would have spent all my time traveling between Milwaukee and Madison and just being a constant presence in those two places. Instead, I went to all 72 counties.
Yeah.
I traveled the state because I think that's what Democrats have to do if they're going to be successful down the road.
Yeah, you have to show up all over the state, run candidates in all 99 assembly districts, all the Senate districts, and so on. What has frustrated me is it has seemed nationally and in our state to an extent, the strategy seems to be at some point the Republicans will so overreach that people will come back to us. And that does happen sometimes, right? I mean, sometimes the Republicans get so bad. I mean, that may happen in 2026, right?
To a certain extent, it may.
Right? Trump and the Republican Congress have been so atrocious and so bad that it is conceivable that the Dems could attain majorities just from reaction to them. But that's not a long-term strategy.
No. And partly it amuses me, but also it saddens me when Democrats do win an election. They win them. If they take the midterms in 2026. I've seen the impulse play out before. I predict it'll happen again. They sort of say, "Oh, they like us again." People really agree with us. And no, it's that they just decided that for the moment, they hate the other side a little bit more than they hate you, but they hate you. And the long-term solution is to do something that makes people stop hating you. And look, Trump is the most unpopular president in American history. If you look at his approval ratings,
Oh my
he
God.
is the lowest approval ratings of any president in US history. But the Democrats currently are polling even lower. They're even less popular than Trump. Trump has trouble staying in the 40s in terms of public approval. Well, the Democrats are having trouble staying in the 30s on public approval. And so the long-term solution is to reconnect with the population and start talking about what they're struggling with, what they're despairing over, and talking about it in blunt terms and saying to the donors, keep your money if you have to, because
Right.
we're going to talk the way we need to talk to people who are suffering. We're going to address that suffering. And if you don't want to donate to us as a result, keep your damn money. Instead of saying fix the damn roads, they should be saying keep your damn money. If you're gonna take us down a path that leads us to 29 or 30% public approval, it's not a trip we're going to take with you. And we're going to address the key struggles that Americans have, and we're going to be bold in doing it. And then we're going to take our chances. That's what I'm looking for.
I agree. Instead of just like looking for gimmicks, I mean, you hear all this stuff, and then maybe if we had a liberal Joe Rogan, you know, maybe if we could get like a popular celebrity on our like all these gimmicks. No, maybe if you actually stood with the population at large.
And speaking of a liberal Joe Rogan, haven't they learned anything from the emergence of Fox News as such a powerhouse in cable news? They tried to create networks of their own, and they didn't work.
Right.
And when Rush Limbaugh was riding high, they tried to create, a liberal version of Rush Limbaugh, and it didn't work. So they've got to find their own ways of connecting with people. But I think it starts with showing people that you understand what they are, you understand the root of their suffering, and that you're willing to talk bluntly about how to help solve these problems. And yeah, none of the gimmicks are going to work, and it certainly isn't going to. If they do win the 2026 midterms, which they may, because the party in power does tend to lose seats in midterm elections. If they come out of there and say, see, everything's good, the public loves us, they're making a huge miscalculation.
I
They
think
are not,
I
they are not well regarded right now.
now what gives me hope, Mike, and we can close out on this, and I think you agree with me on this. What gives me hope is the youth, right? I think that the younger generation gets put down as apathetic, as technology obsessed, and that, I mean, as a college teacher, that's not what I see.
Hmm.
I see people that are very passionate about what's going on. They often have difficulty, as we all, finding a place to fit into that.
Right.
How do I fix it? But I just have this great optimism that the generation coming up really wants to change things for the better. What's your take on that?
Amen to that. The stereotype about Gen Z, that I just I don't buy it, because it doesn't ring true when I interact with young people in that generation. I do think that they can read the handwriting on the wall. They know what's going on. They are not apathetic. They are not ignorant. They're really sharp. They're a sharp bunch, and they care, and they care deeply. And yes, that leaves them despairing about the future of the country, because they see the country wanting to go backward instead of forward. They see the country sort of treading water at best, and they see these national emergencies that need to be addressed, and they long for that change. They will find their voice, and I think they will eventually find their way into positions of authority. And I think it'll be a transformational generation. I find great hope in that thought as well.
Yeah, and I think the Democrats need to be very careful with this, because if you look at someone like Mamdani in New York City, 33 years old, charismatic, smart guy, fierce resistance from the establishment Democratic Party, which I think is a really bad tactical move. I mean, Paul Krugman, who I admire, the economist, I know you're familiar with his work.
Yeah.
He said something that I thought was right on target. He said, look, he said, if the National Democrats want everyone to support these moderate candidates, say for US Senate and for president, you then have to support the progressive candidate when they're on the ballot, right? You can't like force everyone into this so-called moderate. I mean, that doesn't work for a lot of voters,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and I saw it here in Wisconsin. I experienced some of it firsthand.
Yes, you did.
But on a much grander scale, I watched what Bernie has experienced, and you see it play out with Mamdani. To me, one of the most talented politicians on the national scene in America, to me, is AOC.
Oh, yeah.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, whatever it is, she has it. She has an ability to connect with people. She has an ability to cut through all the garble and make a human connection with people. And the Democrats have not sought to elevate her to to the extent that she's a widely known figure. It's because of her own appeal. It's not because the party's done anything to elevate her or give her a stage. They even denied her a chairmanship in a House committee, and put this old guy in, who nobody's ever doesn't even know, in that place, because they had to, they went with seniority.
Who,
I think
rest in peace, died of terminal cancer several months later.
right, right. And to me, she is a tremendous political talent. And like
Yeah.
I said, I don't know what it is, but she has it. And and the party should be actively helping nurture the careers of politicians like that. They shouldn't be fighting Mamdani in New York. I don't know that much about him. I don't know that much about New York politics, but I know Wisconsin politics, and I have a pretty decent vantage point on national politics. And when I see what has happened with Bernie Sanders or with AOC, what has happened to similar figures here in Wisconsin, that doesn't bode well for the party's renaissance. I think you've got to embrace figures like that, try to not try to push them off stage.
No, I agree completely. I mean, when Kamala Harris became the nominee, and she spent so much time in Wisconsin with Liz Cheney. Now, nothing against Liz Cheney. I think she's been heroic as a Republican going against Trump. But I think you need to spend a little bit more time with the progressives in Wisconsin and in other states. I don't think she got much mileage from campaigning with Liz Cheney. So I don't know if her race was a wake-up call for the Dems. We will soon see.
Yeah. But I thought that 2018 would be something here in Wisconsin that would make the party finally realize that maybe primaries are not scary, that they're not harmful, that they actually can be helpful. Because after losing to Walker 3 times, they beat Walker. But
Right.
then in the next U.S. Senate race, they did the same darn thing, and they cleared out the field and sort of steered it all in the direction of a nominee who ends up losing to Ron Johnson. It,
Well,
it
and crazy. Yeah, and I think Mandela Barnes got hurt by not having the primary.
yeah, to me, Mandela was harmed by the party's maneuver, and if he had a hand in it, then I think it was unwise. But I trust that he didn't have a hand in it, and that others within the party wanted that to happen. But what they did in clearing the field and pushing people out with only 2 weeks to go before the election, I think hurt him. I think it left a sour taste in the mouths of a lot of Democratic voters, but it certainly didn't send any kind of a message that was appealing to those independents and those people who are going to swing elections. And I think it hurt him. And so even though Tony Evers came out of a robust primary and beat Walker when 3 previous attempts to take him down had failed, they didn't seem to learn the lesson.
No.
And they repeated the mistake in the U.S. Senate race, and we still have Ron Johnson, the curse of Ron Johnson, as our U.S. Senator.
On that note, Mike, thank you so much for your time. We'll have to do this again soon.
It was a pleasure. Enjoyed
All
it.
right. Appreciate it.